In a city that isn't on any map, there lived a king who had not slept in 7 years. Not because he wasn't tired, because he was afraid of the quiet. And because of what he'd done to make the quiet happen. His name was Shahryar, and the strange part is that he'd been a good king. Ask anyone, they'd tell you. Well, they wouldn't tell you anything. That's rather the point. Let me start again. Once, before the silence, Shahryar had a queen, and the queen told stories. And then she died. It was nothing dramatic, a fever in spring, 3 days. Kings expect their tragedies to be larger than that. Here's what he discovered afterward. Every story in the world sounded like her voice. Not the sad ones, all of them. A merchant telling his son about a good deal. 2 guards trading a rumor. A cook explaining why the bread was late. Anything with a beginning and a middle and an end. And there she was in the next room, just out of reach. So he made a law. No tales, no songs, no jokes. Nothing with a shape to it. And the kingdom obeyed, because kingdoms do. It took about a year for the color to go. Nobody noticed it going. That's how these things work. The dyers stopped dyeing. Who were the colors for? The market went quiet because you cannot haggle without telling one small lie about where you got the thing. Children stopped being named after heroes. Then children stopped playing altogether because every game is a story you agree to believe. And the king did not sleep. 7 years, not 1 hour. He'd gotten exactly what he asked for. My name is Scheherazade. My father was the king's vizier, which meant he was the man who had to stand in the square and read the law out loud. Which meant I grew up in the one house in the city where a story wasn't just forbidden, it was a betrayal. We told them anyway. My sister, Dinazad, was 8 when I started. She had a rule of her own. She would not go to sleep until somebody had lied to her beautifully. So every night I'd wait for the house to go still, and I'd get under the blanket and I'd whisper. I want to be clear about something, because people tell this part wrong. I wasn't brave. I was 17 and I was furious, and from the outside those look identical. My father found out, of course he did. He didn't shout. He sat down on the floor of our room, an old man in the dark, and he asked me what I thought was going to happen. And I told him I was going to go and ask the king for one night. He was smaller than I expected. That's the thing nobody says about Shahryar. 7 years without sleep doesn't turn a man into a monster. It turns him into paper. I offered him a bargain. 1 story a night, that's all. And if I ever bored him, even once, he could ban them forever, and I would never speak again as long as I lived. It was a terrible bargain. I want that on the record. I've had 1,100 nights to think about how bad that bargain was. But here's the thing about a man who has outlawed every story in the world. Nobody has offered him anything in 7 years. And I think he was curious what it might feel like. He nodded. Once. So, the first night? Once there was a fisherman who was very poor and very stubborn, which is a more dangerous combination than people give it credit for. He had a rule, and the rule was 4. 4 casts of the net a day, no more, no less, not 3 when he was tired, not 5 when he was hungry, 4. He'd made the rule when he was young, for reasons he'd long since forgotten, and he kept it the way some men keep a religion, badly and completely. The first cast came up heavy, so heavy he laughed out loud, and held it in hand over hand with his heart going. And what came out of the water was a dead donkey. It took him an hour to cut the net free. The mesh was torn in 9 places. He sat down on the sand and mended it with his fingers and didn't say anything at all. The second cast came up heavier still. A jar, packed to the neck with mud and river sand. He emptied it, washed the net, and looked at the sun, which had moved further across the saffron sky than he wanted it to. The third cast brought up broken pots, glass, a comb with 3 teeth. Bones, but small ones, fish, nothing to be frightened of. And now he stopped, because he had one cast left and a rule. And at home there were 4 people who had eaten yesterday and were expecting to eat today. This is the part the story is actually about, not the magic, this. He waded out further than he'd ever waded, up to his chest. And he threw. It came up light. A jar, yellow copper the size of his torso, sealed at the mouth with a plug of lead, and stamped into the lid. A seal. He knew it. Everybody knew it. It was on the old coins. It was scratched into doorways to keep bad things out. The seal of Solomon. He shook it. Something inside shifted. Slowly, like it was deciding whether to... Now, a wise man throws that jar back into the sea. A wise man doesn't have 4 people at home who ate yesterday. He worked his knife under the lip of the lid, and he leaned on it, and it gave with a sound like a held breath letting go. And nothing happened. For one whole second, nothing happened. Then the smoke came. A thread of it, then a rope, then a river pouring up out of a jar that could not possibly have held it, up past the cliffs, up past the birds, until it had blotted out the whole saffron sky. And then it began to take a shape. And then the sun came up. I closed my mouth. I want you to understand that 20 seconds earlier, this man had been a statue. Now he was leaning forward with his hands on his knees, like a boy at a wrestling match. And my sister, my clever, terrible sister who had rehearsed this, said from the doorway exactly what I'd told her to say. Sister, what happened next? And I said, that depends entirely on whether I'm allowed to tell you tomorrow. He stood up. He walked out. He didn't say a word. But on the arm of that grey throne where his hand had been, 1 thread of gold. 1 night down. 1,000 to go.